All righty, welcome back. This is the Randy Cross Podcast, Season 3, Episode 4. Little briefer, little longer interview today. Briefer overall as far as the podcast goes. Want to remind you here in the days we're living in of COVID-19, get your information where you can get it. And by where you can get it, I would suggest cdc.gov. Or the new one that just went out here the last couple of days, which is coronavirus.com, which has got a lot of information for you and your family, the do's and don'ts and the whats and the hows and the wheres and all that. Just stay safe, wash your hands, just stay safe. That's all I can tell you. Hey, I'm going to talk to Chris Nowinski again. We've talked to him a few times over the last few years. From Concussion Legacy Foundation, and just thought this would be a good time too, now that everyone's sort of focused on the medical side of things, to revisit CTE, concussion, repetitive head injuries, and things like that. So without any further ado, let's get to Chris Nowinski. All right, now as promised, joining us now is the CEO of the Concussion Legacy Foundation, Chris Nowinski. Chris, welcome.
Thanks, Randy. Good to be here.
Thanks. Fantastic. It's really nice of you to take the time out in your southern office down in beautiful, sunny Florida. What's the latest? What's been going on at Concussion Legacy Foundation? I know, obviously, all the news medically has been about this whole coronavirus thing and whatnot, but over the last few months, what's new?
It feels like strange times to be having this discussion, because with no sports going on, concussion risk has suddenly dropped considerably.
Yeah.
So, we have a little time perhaps to, make a dent on when we go back to playing sports. What do they look like? And the reality is, I think what's the biggest change probably since we last spoke is that we were able to publish a study looking at CTE odds in football players. We basically analyzed 266 football players who passed away and tried to understand what was driving their risk of having CTE and what was driving how severe their CTE was. And the most important piece of data that came out of that was that risk appears to be primarily driven by number of years you played football. Basically, every year you play football increases your odds of developing CTE by 30%. Now, that's a huge number.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't tell us. So basically, I think the idea is that the curves on football and CTE actually overlap very closely with smoking and lung cancer. And so it gives us a great way to understand what your risk is. It's not one cigarette. It's not 1 month of smoking cigarettes. It's a lifetime of cigarettes and 2 packs a day. With football, that lifetime appears to be maybe 20 years.
Right.
In the sense that if you play football for 1 year, your risk is probably tiny, maybe even less than 1%. But if you play football for 20 years, we don't have cases that didn't have CTE. It doesn't mean everyone does. It's a very small sample of people who played that long, but it just means that, okay, if that's the case, it drives how we should change football.
And it seemed like, at least in reading some of the things, that one of the things that caught my eye was the risk of CTE more than doubled if you had more than 3 years to what you're talking about, 3 years of football activity.
Right. It actually doubles every 2.6 seasons. So you just think about, like, if we just so what we've done and what you've helped us with, and I'll tell you, when we launched Flag Football Under 14, which was our program to get people to start later, it was driven by the fact that we, were aware of this data years ago. We basically started to pick up this signal. And then once we had a big enough publication, we stopped. We started writing the paper. And it took a while to write that paper, because there's a huge part of bias analysis in there, because everyone's concerned, well, you're only getting sicker cases. So we looked at, even if we assumed only sick people, only CT, only dementia were giving us brains, the risk still was, the lowest end of the reasonable spectrum was 22% per year. So it's not that the bias is not as large as we think it is in terms of understanding this risk. And so that means if you want to get rid of CT in football, the first thing you do is you start playing football later. Those seasons from 5 to 13 are unnecessary, and they're dramatically increasing your risk of developing CT. In fact, if you started at 5 instead of 14, looking at that doubling rate, your risk would be 10 times higher. And so we've been spending a lot of time trying to get people to wrestle with this data to appreciate that this is the solution to all of these stars and longtime football players developing CT, and it's the solution to this minority of high school players that have developed CTE.
Yeah, it's interesting to me why that whole concept. I know why sort of societally in this sort of the niche of football itself, especially youth football, they can be so rabid about not being able to wear pads and helmets and have 8-year-olds run around like bobblehead dolls. But it's crazy to me that people can't see the whole facts as you've been laying them out, as your foundation have been laying them out, as numerous doctors around the world have been laying them out, as far as, repetitive concussive blows. It's not about, like you just said, it's not about it happening to college athletes and NFL athletes. You're taking those kind of things and they're happening to young brains. It's only common sense that it's going to cut back.
Right. And so what we did to try to draw attention to this data is we created a new campaign called Tackle Can Wait, where we created a PSA that was really led by a group called Finger Pain Marketing in Saratoga Springs, New York, because one of their creatives, she lost her father to CT, who was a college football player who died of dementia in his early 60s and was affected his whole adult life. And she grew up really with like the struggle of being a child of a football player with CT, which is hard. So she was able to convince her company to take us on as a pro bono client. And we built this huge, immaculate 30-second PSA that would have cost a ton of money that we got for a nonprofit rate that was quite impressive. But we actually show youth football players, the PSA, and you go to tacklecanwait.com to see the PSA and the data. Football players starting with a tackle, and then during the timeout, the coach starts lighting cigarettes and placing them in people's mouths, and parents are lighting cigarettes for their kids on the field, with the whole idea being, look, we look at people who light a cigarette for the child is crazy. Well, letting your child get hit in the head 500 times, based on the data we have, might be as crazy. And so we need to start thinking about what's a responsible approach, considering now that we have this data.
Hey, has anyone considered, I'm sure you probably have, you and your group, but given the amount of cancellations, college football, high school football, professional football, no one hits in the NFL in the offseason. But without spring football, just in the little niche of what you do and this whole issue about head injuries, I mean, the post-concussion syndrome, the post-concussion problems, this is going to be an unprecedented period of time where you literally should have absolutely zero in the world of football because there won't be any hitting.
Right.
Is there anything that can be done with that kind of information, do you think?
It's not really, just because most studies don't track head impact exposure. Okay. So just losing a couple weeks, and spring football now is less and less. So we're talking about a few hitting days per year. It's something, but it's sort of a drop in the bucket. You sort of have to look at like all the opportunities you have. And so when we talk to people about football reform, age is number one, and then hits to the head is number two, right? And most of those hits historically have come in practice. At some levels of football, that's changing. The NFL doesn't in practice. Colleges still do, because no one can tell the college coaches what to do. They're the kings of campus. High schools, in some places, like New Jersey's down to 15 minutes a week during the season, which is fantastic. Michigan, I think, is down to 30 minutes. Other than that, it's sort of business as usual, even if they have written guidelines. So we aren't even taking the low-hanging fruit yet. And I think part of that problem, and I'd be curious your thoughts on this, is that we sort of have a crisis of leadership in football right now. when you actually talk to the stakeholders at each level, you're basically talking to four groups, right? You got the NFL, you got the NCAA, you got high school football, National Federation, and you've got youth football. And as a scientist, we're looking at all lifetime exposure of football players. The moment you start to the moment you end, which will cross 1, 2, 3, or all four of those areas. We think about you as years of football, but each of those levels, when we talk to them, we're saying we're only providing a little bit of the football, so we don't have to change, right? High school is saying we're only 4 years. No, very few people get CT in 4 years of football, ignoring what happens before and after. Youth football is telling us we don't have kids who've had CT who only played youth football, and it's like, show me a kid who's only smoked, for a year when he was 10 and he has lung cancer. Like it's a really uninformed way to look at risk. And so, NFL is changing things for the NFL, but that's 2,000 guys. Mm-hmm. So the problem is if we don't change everything at all levels sort of at the same time, nothing's going to change for outcomes. And so I'm trying to understand, who do we talk to get football changed?
Yeah, how important in that change then is talking to perhaps the networks and the broadcasters and the people that are actually talking to the public the most directly. I mean, people would say, hey, it's coaches or it's players. But I mean, broadcasters, I think, touch more people on a weekly basis with either information or misinformation in some cases.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. So, and what's been an interesting challenge is getting CT information out to the public. You'll hear a very small minority of people, usually some sports medicine doctors, complaining that CT is in the press too much. But the reality is, like, when you look at this, we're talking about a preventable disease, not unlike COVID, right? Where it's saying, do not be in contact with people and you will not get the disease. I mean, that's a tough thing to do in life, but we're doing it. We're literally doing it. Or we're saying, don't hit people in the head and you won't get this CT disease, but we have no megaphone to do it, right? The government's behind it on the research side, but not a public health side. CDC made fact sheets, but there's no money behind getting those fact sheets in front of people. So we've been really working closely with major media outlets, like the New York Times has done a great job of doing CT stories, HBO Real Sports, USA Today, the big outlets. So people are hearing about it. But that's a conversation, people to read that. What you're talking about is much harder to do with CTE because CT doesn't come up in broadcasts. Yeah. Right? Like, there's no real context for that. Was a big tackle. I hope it doesn't get CTE because, again, it's the repetitive hitting.
Right.
So instead, what we have been partnering with the media, and it was really a program we created with Bob Costas. Concussions are something you can educate through broadcasting. Mm-hmm. Right? You and I both know that we've watched football on the sideline and they'd laugh. Right? As recently as 2 years ago. Now, we said that's unacceptable because there's always kids learning about concussions for the first time watching sports. And you're getting millions of people at a crack. It's a great way to change the culture. It's been proven in other disease models. So we are now educating broadcasters on how to cover concussions so that they not only look good, but they're making sure they're sending the right messages to the kids watching. And so we now have 9 universities that are teaching journalism students. We've got nearly 100 professional broadcasters that have been trained, and now we're talking about partnering with networks to train all their broadcasters.
Yeah, that's a great idea, because that does, whether right or wrong, it forms a lot of opinion just by what they hear in those little 15-second sound bites.
Right, and it's sort of funny because you'll get the people who know, and they'll talk about the obvious concussion, but then you also get the people that clearly don't know and just get silence or strange conversations that go in a different direction. I don't know, you've been through that. I mean, how are you trained to talk during an injury?
Oh yeah, well, never speculate. That's the golden rule. Never speculate. Never say it might be this or it might be that. And there's a gazillion classic type situations that have come up when that's been done.
Right, and what we train on that is, it's still okay. And Andrew Kramer and Jay Donde and Olivia Stomsky all were very helpful in creating this. It's the idea that if they're grabbing their ankle, you are allowed to report they're grabbing their ankle, right? Mm-hmm. Looks like an ankle injury because they're grabbing their ankle. You don't speculate on what tendon was ripped. with concussions, we say they're grabbing their head or they fell over when they got up. You report the sign of concussion, and then the job is to say that might be a sign of concussion. And therefore, based on the protocol that exists, which is open, everyone knows it, you are allowed to then say, with showing that sign, they should go to the sideline and be evaluated. And then that also creates accountability when they don't, because they still don't sometimes.
Yeah, or when they immediately go back onto the field.
And so I work with journalists to, right. If we don't say anything, it suddenly looks normal, right? I mean, we need our broadcasters to speak up and hold people accountable. And they've played a great role in doing that, right? Remember, like Ed Cunningham getting so upset about the Michigan quarterback going back in years ago before he just left broadcasting altogether because he couldn't stand watching the abuse.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. So, I mean, were you ever trained on concussions or anything like that, or injuries when you were broadcasting every week?
Not really. It's always, like I said, the hard and fast rule was to never speculate, but I never hesitate though. When I see a big blow and that guy's down, especially when there's that fencing motion and some of the other spasms are happening, I never hesitate to mention, that is not a good sign. I don't diagnose, but I don't mind pointing out that's not a good sign, and that guy's got no business being in this ball game or maybe even the next ball game.
Right. And you feel comfortable saying that because you played and and you follow this very closely. And not everybody does. And we're also trying to give license to the people who don't feel comfortable even saying the word concussion. Like, no, you should say it, and here's when and how it's appropriate.
How much do you think people really know about this issue, about concussions, about brain injuries as it relates to football? I mean the general public. I mean, even the media, who we're all trying to educate at times.
I think one of the great successes we've had since we started the foundation in 2007 and started banging the drum and going in front of Congress, those early years, is that everybody now knows you should not go back into the game when you have a concussion. And everybody is pretty well educated on what concussion signs to look for. So we're pretty good on protocol, on recognition and response. We're terrible on prevention. We don't talk about how important it is to prevent because we spend a lot of time still minimizing the actual injury itself. And the actual injury itself, for most people, is not a huge deal, but for some people is life-changing. And I think we don't understand why, we don't understand how, and we don't really understand always how to fix it. So we're also better at concussion rehab, but we're not perfect. And so we started a helpline. So anybody out there paying attention to this, if you struggle with post-concussion syndrome, if you think you have symptoms of CTE, go to concussionfoundation.org. What's going on? We will help you with medical referrals. We'll help you with education and help you appreciate what to do. So we don't understand the science behind concussion that well. We can't always fix it. And then CTE, I think we know a lot more than we did, but boy, is there a lot to learn. I mean, we think about, if you compare CT to Alzheimer's, similar diseases, we've studied Alzheimer's for 100 years and, hundreds of billions of dollars. We don't have a treatment.
Yeah, I mean,
CT is still starting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one thing that riles me up pretty consistently is at times kind of mixed messages out there. Knowing you guys, knowing the organization, and doing the great work that you and all the doctors up there are doing. When your group gets attacked the way they do at times, and hey, you're all big boys, that happens, that's business. Because ultimately it is about money, and people don't understand that. It's about money that's coming in, and they want the money to go somewhere else or to somebody else. But that's never the case. It's always a very strong sort of general statement made, an attack, and we should be doing this. I coached youth football for my sons. Those type of statements, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. Well, so I'll take this in a couple of different ways, but what you told me, what you mentioned there is sort of an interesting problem that we deal with football and your children, is that our personal experience isn't going to tell us what to do, in the sense that you let your kid play, you roll the dice, you won't see the problems because you'll be dead, right? If we're talking about onset of symptoms in your 40s, 50s, 60s, you're not going to see it. So we're actually trying to listen to, and we're interviewing our family members to tell us these stories. We've actually got a situation, the woman who was the creative on our smoking PSA, her grandfather's still alive. He's 90 and watched his son die of CTE. And that's an interesting perspective because you don't see that very often.
Right.
And so your empirical experience is not going to inform what's the right decision here. You actually have to appreciate the science or listen to people you trust, like you, who have seen it, and lived it a little longer and more closely. But I'll tell you one other way that we can appreciate why there's such a divide, especially in the medical community. And this was picked up and said very eloquently in a recent New Yorker article about this, is that the writer realized when she talked to public health people, she sort of got one discussion, which was, hey, from a public health perspective, we got to stop doing this. This is crazy. Very easy fix. Prevention, prevention, prevention. And if you're trying to convince people to change behavior, you open up the door and say, this is how horrible it can be. And you don't hold back.
Yeah.
But the group that's upset about this are clinicians who are actually treating patients in the clinic, coming in and hearing the messaging about prevention and the horror stories about CTE and going, well, how does that apply to me? And that can be very annoying to them or troubling to them because they see people overreacting. And so they don't think you should be talking about the horror show of CT as much because it can stress out patients. And I also agree, you understand that perspective. And so we actually have a newsletter we send to now like 5,000 people concerned to have CT that's all full of hope and all full of, hey, you might think you have it, but not everybody is going to take their life. Not everyone's going to lose their mind. People have successful lives managing the disease, so don't lose hope. And how do you message both of those things precisely? And you can't, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm talking to parents, don't do this. But if I'm talking to ex-football players like you and me, I'm saying, hey, you can't change the past. But let's work together to find treatments for this. But don't think doom and gloom all the time, because I can also tell you plenty of positive stories about people who've played a long time and are doing great, right?
Yeah.
Like we have to emphasize that to other football players.
Yeah, I was just doing your math in my head. Let's see, 21 years of football. Yipes. Yeah, but
it's a small group of people that we have to study that have played 20 years of football. But we have to be honest. We just don't have that many cases that played a long time. We don't have any.
And I hear all the time when the subject comes up for me, and I point out, I said, hey, I donated my brain, Concussion Legacy Foundation now into the brain bank, Super Bowl down in Houston 3 or 4 years ago. And I think the first reaction most people have is, well, what were your first signs? And I said, my first signs? Well, my first signs of donation was they gave me a card that says my brain's been donated. That was my first sign. And the whole idea of this study that has to go on, and I tell ex-players all the time and people that ask me about it, donate your brain. It doesn't take much. Here's the website. Go there, commit to it. Donate your brain. Well, I only played 3 years in high school. I only played like when I was a little kid. Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, if you're going to do a study, they can't all be brains that played NFL and played 20 years. And that doesn't really tell you exactly. You need the ones that are clean. You need the ones that did play 20 and don't have it. And to find out why and what the difference is.
I'll give you a window into that. And everything you said is spot on. When we did the study of 266 brains, 255 were donated to our brain bank. They also found they had 11 football players in the Framingham Heart Study, which is a community sample of the town of Framingham, Massachusetts. Of those 11, because the average person tend to have shorter careers, 0 of them actually had the disease. So, I can tell you that, again, short careers is, the problem is not football, it's too much football, right?
Right.
Everyone could play a season, get banged around, be tougher. But then after that, it's diminishing returns to how much you learn in terms of the game, and it's exponentially increasing risk. And that's the conversation we need to have.
That's fantastic. Hey, I really appreciate you joining me, Chris. I could do this forever. I know you're a busy man. Good luck in everything going forward. Congratulations on the new addition to the family coming. That's fantastic, fantastic news. And as everyone should, stay well and healthy.
You too, Randy. Good to talk to you, buddy.
Thanks, Chris.
All right,
bye-bye now. All right, great stuff from Chris Nowinski. He's always good to talk to. And, you know, this is not going away as far as the whole problem with concussions and the CTE and disease and what exactly causes it, because there's so much we don't know. And as that's been a popular subject these days, as far as how much we don't know, they're going to help us get the better way towards a solution to this problem. All right, next segment up is sports, or is it? Ah, yes, sports. You remember those things? That was the stuff that you can tell your kids back in the old days used to happen on the old light box. Well, there's still ways to see sports. Now, it's all sports that have happened. So unless you are around some people that are exceedingly dim, you won't be able to bet on them. But if they'll take the bet, do it. You look at a website like this, Dude Perfect. You look at all the various sports out there. They've all got their different outlets to let you see different kinds of sports. BT Sports, Barn Burner Network, CA, the rest of them have great ideas. YouTube has presences from all these sports and networks. So if you loved the old Final Four back in 1983, or the Final Four in 2010, or the PGA in 2011, or the first Tiger Woods Masters, you can find all that stuff on YouTube. You've got great resources. They're at your disposal. Good luck with them. And again, wash your damn hands. All right? Time now for the Wahmbulance.
You better grab your blankie and just squeeze it real tight. These people need to get a real life.
Where do I start? It's kind of a general Wahmbulance. And I don't mean the ones with stars on their lapels up here, on the epaulets. I'm talking about us all in general. Yeah, this is right down the street from me. Well, actually not down the street, but pretty damn close. Got into a fight, customers did, at a Costco. Over stuff in the foreground there. Toilet paper. Still don't get it. Can't be explained to me. Why hoarding the toilet paper? In fact, there's a great comedian, does unbelievable impressions. You've seen him on Fox. You've seen him quite often on TV. Frank Caliendo does unbelievable impressions. Well, that mind came up with this.
John, here's what happens when people hoard toilet paper.
Yeah, you end up with a guy sticking his ass up against a fire hydrant like it's a bidet, and wait a second. I recognize that ass.
John, you just put two and two together. Not unlike Jessica Fletcher on Murder, She Wrote. Coming up right after this clip.
Yeah, except on the West Coast. Hey, I wonder if Jessica knows who's been hoarding all the toilet paper.
And my favorite part of that was, except on the West Coast. How about this guy here? Almost 18,000 bottles and packs of various forms of hand sanitizers and hand cleaners. And he was going on Amazon and eBay and selling them at a pretty hefty profit. I guess that would be called profiteering. Well, if you've wondered if anyone really cares about that, well, you now know that Amazon and eBay do, because they've closed him down. And supposedly he's going to be donating all these supplies that he has acquired. I don't know. I'll believe that when I see it. But yeah. Karma, she's a bitch, ain't she? All right, let's make a beeline now for something we all need, and that's a good feel-good story.
This is the good news. This is the good news.
Now, this week's feel-good story is not from the dodo. It's actually a people feel-good story. And it's an amazing story of sort of humans helping humans, and something we got to see a whole lot more of. Now, you don't have to pull a person out of a burning car to help them these days. You can go shop for an elderly next door neighbor. You can help people in your neighborhood. You can help other members of your family. But check out this story. It happened in West Virginia, and it tells you a lot of great things about first responders, everybody that's paid to do that, but most importantly, just a regular guy.
Christopher Caldwell just got off the phone with his wife, telling her he'd be home for dinner on Monday night when he pulled around the corner on Kanawha State Forest Road and saw a car in a ditch with the driver's side door pinned to the hillside.
And the closer I got, I could see fire underneath. So I pulled up, I seen a gentleman. I said, "Do you need help?" He said, "Yes, I need help." He's not responding.
Caldwell immediately pulled over and joined the rescue efforts, but they couldn't get the driver out.
And we was pulling on his legs, his arms. We was trying everything and just trying to catch our breath and go back in. And I kept saying, "Lord, please give us the strength. Give us the strength to get this man out of here."
That's when Kanawha County Deputy of the Year, Ashley Cadle, arrived on scene.
There's a bunch of people screaming. There's somebody inside the vehicle. It's on fire.
So she runs in and just selflessly, just right in there with us. We're trying to pull him out. The fire's getting bigger and stronger.
Both Cadle and Caldwell, along with the others, were fighting with everything in them to get the man, 3 times Cadle's size, out of the car.
The whole time I'm telling myself, Ashley, you can't let this guy die in front of you. You cannot let this guy burn up in front of you. Like, I was going to do anything it took to get him out of that vehicle.
Deputy Cadle, along with the group of citizens, made one final try to get the driver out.
And I put my feet against the door frame and I just put all of my body weight into it. We all just pulled, and it couldn't have been 15 seconds later, 30 seconds later that we heard an explosion and the car blew up.
I was just thinking, I've got to get this man out. I can't let this guy burn. I just can't do that.
Sheriff Rutherford recognizing both the citizens and the deputy, knowing heroes can come in all shapes and sizes.
I just feel like I did what needed to be done.
Yeah, that's a great story. 2 pretty special individuals right there, and they've meant everything to that gentleman, saving him from a burning car with total disregard for their own safety. We need more of that, especially these days. And like I said, it doesn't have to be a burning car. It can just be the simplest acts, but don't forget about your fellow man. All right. Well, I want to remind you where you found us social media-wise. Facebook, Twitter, all the rest, gruelingtruth.com, barnburner.ca, iTunes. We're all over the place. Or randycross.com. Going to be St. Patrick's Day this Tuesday. Obviously, a lot of the huge celebrations have been canceled, but just a reminder that it is a nice holiday. I'm part Irish. Heck, everybody's got a little Irish in them, especially on March 17th. But make it safe, make it sane, and stay healthy. And before we go to happy trails, wash your damn hands.